be a God when there is so much craziness in the world? And whether it's the wars, the ugliness, as you said, that goes on across the world, or whether it's the loss of a loved one. And so much on that spectrum in between. Things happen that make us wonder, well, this doesn't fit in with my picture of God. I was connected to God, but then suddenly things started happening that no longer, it was like, what's happened to you? You've changed. I'm no longer in love, right? We had this beautiful relationship, but then it almost starts to feel like a betrayal. I trusted you, I loved you, and now you've let me down. And this is really, really painful and really real. What's important to remember, first of all, is that there's no scripture in the world that I know of, no quotation of God in any language, in any tradition, in which it says, connect to me, love me, and bad things will never happen. And the reason that this is so important is we take it like that almost implicitly, but it's not actually said to us. It's not a choice between either there's God or there is this ugliness and pain. And the question becomes, well, how can there be both? What kind of conception of God would I have to have in order for there to be room for this ugliness? Because obviously the answer is not ignore it. That gets us into the state, that I joke about a lot of, I've had this beautiful meditation, I'm in so much peace, I'm in so much bliss, just don't come near me. Don't talk to me. Don't make me go anywhere or do anything, because I'm in peace right now. And that's not very sustainable, sadly. It's beautiful while it lasts, and we all know that feeling. But it's not sustainable. In order for it to be sustainable, we have to be able to do it with our eyes open. It cannot require the absence of a certain person or of a certain situation or of a certain experience. Because remember that God is infinite. And if he, she, it is infinite, then it has to encompass and include everything. Which means the minute I start saying, well, this can't fit here, it's no longer God I'm talking about. It's my creation, my projection of what God would be if I were in charge of creating God. And that wasn't a task we were given with. So this infiniteness includes a lot of things. And one of the things that it includes is free will. It's not that God created ugliness, because this is a lot of times how it comes up. Why did God create ugliness? Why did God create evil? God didn't create evil or ugliness. It's not like he took a magic wand and said, okay, you're going to be good and you're going to be evil. The way that we are taught about this, in short, but a way that for me at least really helps me understand the role that God plays and the role that just human nature plays, is who we are at the core is divine. And we know that because we've been created out of God. Remove infinity from infinity, you've got infinity. Our saints tell it to us, our math teachers tell it to us. Either way, if you have something that is infinite, you have something that is divine, from that you create 1 or 2 or 10 billion other pieces. Well, each of them is also infinite. I mean, infinity divided by 7 billion is infinity, mathematically. So what we are at the core is divine. However, we have this body, which is our vehicle for awakening, the medium through which we are able to experience our own consciousness. We're the only species, and this is why they talk about a human birth being the highest level birth, and the birth in which we can attain enlightenment we're the only species that is able to look at its own consciousness. Most of the animals certainly seem much better than we are. They eat only as much as they need. They attack only if they've been attacked first. They pretty much live and let live. There's an incredible harmony in nature. So if you just looked at it like that, you'd wonder, well, it's amazing that any human ever gets enlightened, and it's amazing that any animal doesn't. The issue is that as humans, we have something that none of the other species has, which is the ability to step out of the doer and to watch it. When we talk about the witness, that I'm able to watch my own consciousness. That's something only we have. So this body is the vehicle for, the medium of our awakening. But what happens is we identify with it. And we start to think that this is who I am. It's color, it's age, it's beauty, it's education, all of that. So we start to identify as, here's who I am. Based on that, then, we end up with anger. If I am this body, I am what I own, I am my relationships, and you do something to infringe on that, to hurt that, well, I'm going to get angry. The same way that an animal is going to protect its property. Maybe only a small area. But if this is my territory, I've peed here, I've peed there, this is now mine. Right? That's how animals do it. And you infringe on that, you can be pretty sure I'm going to get angry. Well, we do the same thing. We don't do it by peeing all over because we've got the mental constructs to just do it. This is who I am. This is mine. This is me. But if you infringe on it, it makes me angry. If someone seems to have a better package deal than I do, I feel jealous. I start to compete. Then we lie, then we cheat, and then the stories go on. The reason that I take you through this journey is that which you're seeing in the world is the result of ignorance. And it's ignorance that says, I am this body. A lot of the ugliness is based on I identify as this religion or that religion, this culture or that culture, this color or that color. If I identify as consciousness and I see you as consciousness, I've got a body, you've got a body, the same way that I've got a car, you've got a car, I've got a pair of socks, you've got a pair of socks. But I'm not going to identify you as your socks. I'm perfectly able to understand that they're just what's covering your feet to keep them warm. If I'm able to understand you are consciousness, you are soul, you are essence, and this body is just what you're wearing, like you wear a pair of socks or shoes, well then we're not going to go to war over which color your socks are and which color my socks are. Which culture you're from, which culture I'm from. Which book you subscribe to, which book I subscribe to, which language you use to talk about essence, which language I use. The core of all of that comes from the ignorance of identifying as this body. If I don't identify as my religion or my color or my culture or my gender, then you can be pretty sure I'm not going to harm someone else based on their religion or culture or color or gender. The other piece of it is, if I identify as the body, then my highest goal is feeding the desires of the body. If I am this body, then when the body yells, I want it, well, I better give it to it. Because that's who I am. It's what I need. And it gets to an extreme. Yesterday, I was having a session with a group of people who are on a retreat for recovery from addiction. And that it takes it to an extreme. If I don't have it, if I'm an alcoholic and I can't drink, if I'm an addict and I can't use, whatever my addiction may be, everything from Facebook to heroin and everything in between. If I can't have it, there's a level of anxiety that builds and a sense that I'm going to fall apart. Because if I am the body, I need it. And so whether I'm looking for something to fill my hunger, something to fill my ego, I'm going to do it because that's who I am. I am that hunger. I am that lust. I am that greed. I am that ego. And this is what leads to the ugliness. But that's not what God created. God created us as divine. From him, her, itself. Out of him, her, itself. Our ignorance is what leads to the ugliness. Our identification is what leads to the ugliness. And so the question becomes not, how can God let this happen? But how can I start a revolution of people not buying into that illusion, not buying into that ignorance? People who say, I refuse to look at you based on your religion, color, culture, gender. That's what we need. And that's the path that's truest to the way that God created us. Maybe if he could do it all again, he wouldn't give us free will. You know, if parents, you must have had the experience of giving your child a present once that they really wanted and then you really regret it. Shouldn't have given them that. But it's given. So I don't know, maybe if God were going to do it all again, we wouldn't get free will. Clearly we've abused it. But just like a parent who gives something to the child with the best intentions, and the child then, in a moment of anger, ignorance, greed, whatever, goes out and does something stupid with what the parent has just given them, doesn't mean the parent doesn't exist. Doesn't mean the parent doesn't have the best intentions. It just means that when the umbilical cord was cut, the child got his own legs, his own arms, his own brain. And you can't really control everything your children do. And God, of course, could in theory control it, but as part of the package of nature, chose to give us free will and chose to give us the law of karma, which in many cases is an even more powerful element than control. If God were controlling everything, there'd be no place for karma. Because then I wouldn't have done any act anyway. I would just be a puppet. So there would be no karma to experience. But in order for us to have karma, we have to have free will to make choices. And so maybe the point was that God really wanted us to understand the law of karma and how that works and what that means. And to finally get to the point of saying, okay, enough. Hence, we've been given free will. But right now, God and you and the world need you to get back connected. Because if the only people who are being deeply inspired from within are people who are being inspired to do harm, and the rest of us are just disconnected, the ugliness is just going to grow. The problems are just going to grow. We have to get connected, knowing that that power is all powerful. Just needs enough of us to connect to it. I'll end with one of my favorite stories, true story, of a professor I had in my psych PhD program, who her husband was a chaplain. So they were very, very, very religious. And in addition to being a professor, she worked with children who were dying of AIDS. And someone said to her one day, how do you do it? How do you hold both of these realities in your life and in your heart? On the one hand, this deep belief that you must have. I mean, your husband's a chaplain, you're very religious. How do you hold this deep belief in God? And a plan, divine plan, on the one hand, and spend most of your day with children who are suffering and dying through no fault of their own on the other hand. And she gave an answer, and it's now been well over 20 years, but I've held it very deeply all these years. She said, I never doubt the presence of God. And I never doubt the presence of a plan. She said, but I do find myself sometimes asking God whether maybe there couldn't be a better plan. And I loved that. And I hold on to it because connecting to God doesn't mean that we're not allowed to question. Doesn't mean we're not allowed to wonder. Doesn't mean that we're not allowed to ever ask whether, couldn't there maybe, don't you think, if you just maybe, came to me for some advice, I could really help you out here? When we have a personal relationship with God, it's all allowed. God never said, thou shalt not ask questions. But the answer to the question is not to cut yourself off. Because then you've cut yourself off from the well, the spring, from which you drink. We need God. God doesn't need us. We need that connection. So reconnect yourself in a broader, bigger, more all-encompassing way. Then instead of God being a one with a wand of sitting up there making the decisions, a creator, a knower, a planner. Whose creation, pieces of it, are in the midst of a sort of Frankenstein effect. That free will thing that they were given is running amok. But that doesn't change the presence and the power of the divine. Just makes us more responsible to bring them back from running even more amok.